Viral game ideas with LakeSo5. Hi everybody, I'm LakeSo5. If you haven't met me before, I'm the creative director at Video LLC. Technically, I own the company, but I work on vision. I help sculpt some worlds sometimes. Sometimes I come in at the end of a build. Sometimes I'm there at the beginning. Sometimes I'm there throughout. But point is, I built quite a few worlds over the years, and I'm excited to share with you everything I know. And so without further ado, we'll move on to the next slide. Our agenda for today, we're going to cover some basics of what makes things kind of exciting and fun and potentially viral. We're also going to be looking at some example worlds and looking at what made those worlds pop. We're also going to look at horizon algorithm, what is there today that we need to be tracing and tracking. I don't know the algorithm, but I can share with you what I've heard and kind of what I've seen work. We're going to be talking about progressive depth, and depth referring to depth of knowledge. So how much does a user know about your game? When you go viral, they don't know as much. So how do you grow that depth over time, but also make it not required for the new users who are showing up in mass? Then I'll have some recommendations for you. And then at the end, we have time for Q&A. So we'll just keep on jiving. The basics. All right. Making your users feel something and allowing them to create action. I don't want to keep reading the slides, so I'm going to try to kind of go more freeform. But the point is that when a user shows up in your world, they want to have an impact on the world. And I call that creating action. And the easiest way to think about that is like effects, visual effects, sound effects, haptic effects. We're all in the mindset right now, or we should be in the mindset of like mobile development, developing for mobile. So haptics might not be top of mind, but you really want to make sure your worlds are both amazing on mobile and amazing in VR. And haptic feedback is one of those things that's easy to forget, especially when you're developing on the desktop editor and you're just building and you don't go into VR as often. I've been developing on the desktop editor for nearly a year now. And yeah, I don't go into VR nearly enough. So the most recent game I built, the haptics were a little too strong. Even though we had them on light, we needed to change them to very light and just change them up. But I wasn't getting into VR enough. So fortunately, I had some testers who were able to be like, hey, this is a problem. And I was like, oh, thank you. But definitely got to make sure you've got haptics. The feedback that you get from a haptic pulse is very satisfying. And these sort of feelings are very primal. When you get like a pop-up or the pop-up effect, I mean, like when a confetti bursts or any sort of effect happens because you did something, that releases a very primal feeling. I see this in my daughter. She's 2.5 years old now. And when she accomplishes something, she goes around yelling, oh my gosh, I did it. Can you believe it? Give me a high five, Dad. I need a hug. This is the most amazing thing ever. And like I said, it's just very primal. When you create action, it causes this sort of inner excitement. And so visual effects, sound effects, and haptic feedback are ways that users can feel the action and see the action. You can also provide them with pop-ups. I recommend being careful with pop-ups. I've definitely overused these in my experience. I need to be a little bit more toning down because people will start toning them out. But you can use pop-ups to convey information like you hit so-and-so or you gained X amount of money. And using pop-ups can definitely be very satisfying for the user to learn more about what's going on in the world. Motion and scale are examples of additional types of way that users can create action that isn't just effects. So if something moves, if you punch something and it moves around, even just like a punching bag, which we've all seen, right? But that's very satisfying. Scale, physics objects, just like you name it. Anything that can give the user the feeling that they've created the action is very exciting. And so you can use these basics to create simple addictive loops that people are going to want to continue doing over and over. And so I say use effects always. And I'm sure there's a case where this doesn't apply, but really try your best to include like a visual effect, a sound effect, and haptic feedback wherever you're building these sort of like miniature loops and experiences. So we're going to quickly look at some viral hit worlds and see what they did that worked. And I'm going to just like prepare you, like get a glass of ice to dump on your head because the first world is Hit People Simulator. I know, we're ripping this Band-Aid off early. This is actually a great world for quite a few reasons. And I think it's very important that we take a look at worlds that are in the top of the menu and understand why are these great worlds, what makes them really successful. And the thing that I found after sitting in there for half an hour with just 3 other kids just continuously playing is that you have a small number of players, and this social experience allows for each of the players to have a say and an impact on the experience. When you have 16 players or 32 players, suddenly you feel like you have to sit in the corner and not be a participant, but being a small player experience, you really got to have an impact on what people were talking about, the stories they were telling. And this is the other part. This is a tell your own story type of location. This isn't like a prescribed story. The kids get to be like they're in the toy box, like they're at home with their friends, making believe. And this is what I saw continuously in this world. I think that is part of the reason it was so successful and is still so successful. And there's constantly creating action. Everywhere you look, you're bopping things around, you're interacting with things, you create action everywhere you look, and you get a lot of creativity. So I think that's what makes this world so successful. Do I think it's the perfect world? No, but we've seen, obviously, it's had quite a massive hit with the younger audiences, and I think there's a lot we can take away from that. So that was our first one to look at. Next up, we're going to take a look at Murder Village, Murder Manor, and Spin the Bottle. What do these three worlds have in common? You want to be it. I think this is something that you can use to your advantage in most worlds. It's random selection, whether we're talking about random role selection, like in these three worlds, where in Murder Village you get to be the murderer, in Murder Manor you have a couple different roles you can be, whether that's murderer, sheriff, or innocent, and in Spin the Bottle you get to be the person who gets to make the decision. But that random selection means you want to keep playing because you want to be it, right? So if you're in Murder Village, you really want to be the murderer, and that takes a while. You have to get signed up on a list, you've got to wait a few rounds until you're it, and then once you get that hit of being it, you want to do that again, so you stay for another few sessions until you're it again. And I really think that's something you can implement, whether it's role selection. You can also use this in the latest world I built with Ash XO. We have random cars being generated, and people determine the cars by buying them. And so if you buy a brand new vehicle and you want to see that vehicle, you're going to stay for longer until that vehicle appears. So using this sort of random selection to get people to hang out longer and wait to see the thing that they want. And if that thing is really satisfying, like getting to be it, or getting that vehicle that's maybe it gives you an extra boost of money, that then keeps them there for a little bit longer because they're like, oh, that was amazing, I want to feel that again. And I think one of the things that I would share here, sorry, I'm trying to say this politely. My experiences in Murder Village have been less than ideal because being it is so rare. So when I went to build Murder Manor, I made sure that you could be the murderer more frequently. So in Murder Manor, it's a 1 in 5 chance. In Murder Village, it can be that way if there's not a lot of people signed up. But you can also see where there's 10 people signed up and you could play for 2 hours and not be the murderer in Murder Village. But in Murder Manor, you're going to be at 25 or 20% of the time, roughly. And it's pretty much guaranteed that you'll get to be at least once within an hour. I'd like to make that even more guaranteed because it is possible using random chance like we do in Murder Manor that you could go missing it over and over and over again for over an hour. And when that happens, people feel really bad and it like kind of ruins the experience. So I'd love to put a counter in that tracks how many times were they not murderer and then be like, oh, if it's the 10th time, we guarantee they're going to be murderer. So, okay. Random selection, pretty awesome. Social experiences, these three also are huge social experiences. The way the users control these experiences is unbelievable. So let's start with Spin the Bottle because it's the one that we've heard a lot about recently. And in Spin the Bottle, the users can make up their own rules. There isn't a lot of prescribed rules to the game. And so if you want to say like it's a truth or dare version of Spin the Bottle, you have to answer a question, otherwise you're getting shot. People can make their own rules up, and that is really fun. I see the same thing in Murder Manor where you see sometimes people playing it differently. So sometimes people will play it like, oh yeah, I'm the murderer, or sometimes they'll lie. And sometimes, there's all sorts of variants on the way that people play the game, creating differences in how that experience is. And the same thing's true in Murder Village, depending on how people engage and how they play. They can kind of make their own experience, which makes it a lot of fun. So social can cause a crafting of the experience that allows, in my opinion, the world to be a long-lasting hit. With a game that is more uniformly the same and it's always the same experience, I feel like that's going to die off relatively quickly. But if you can have something that the users who are playing it change the experience, that has a lot more staying power because every time you play, depending on who you're playing with, it can be a completely different experience. Another example of this that I want to mention about Spin the Bottle is I've never played with my friends, which is really sad. I've only played it 4 or 5 times, and I've only played it with kids, and they always shoot me, and I never have a good experience because I'm the adult in the room, and they're like, get him out of here. But I've heard from my friends who do play Spin the Bottle that if you go into an instance with just people you know, it's an incredible experience. And at some point I should give that a shot. But just another example of how the people you're with can really shape the experience. We're going to move into Murder Manor. And here I wanted to talk about some of the retention tactics that we implemented. I'm not saying these are perfect or that you need to put all of these in your world, but I just thought I'd share a little bit of what worked for us. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the daily streak. Now, this is not going to hook every single person, but we have at least one user with well over 300 days straight of playing Murder Manor, which breaks my brain. I definitely didn't expect that when we created this world. But yeah, they're very quickly approaching a full year of playing, and we'll probably see that continue. So the daily streak, for the users who know about it and who care about it, encourages them to come back every day to make sure they're getting that daily streak, which is incredible for your retention, obviously. So implementing a daily streak is relatively easy to implement. If you're in code blocks, there's a way that you can get the number of days since the epoch. And in TypeScript, you can get the milliseconds since epoch and divide it by 24 times 60 times 60 times 1,000, which is the number of milliseconds in a day. And that gives you the number of days since the epoch. And basically you can compare that to the last day they were there. And if it is -1, then you can set it to more. It's a little oversimplifying it, but daily streaks are relatively simple to implement. Would highly encourage you to do that. And moving on to the next bit. Leveling up. I find leveling up is something that we can say is akin to a lot of different things. In my opinion, what this means for users of Murder Manor specifically is that when they come back, they retain where they left off. There's this sort of sense of, I didn't lose anything by leaving the world and coming back. And so there's a lot of ways you can implement that just generically across a lot of other worlds. But for us, you have a level above your head. There really isn't anything in the world you get to keep. But when you come back, you have this sort of, this is a terrible way to describe it, but it's kind of like a prestigiousness in the world. People know you are a higher level. That's kind of exciting. We've also made that this level has a specific color set to it. So you see users who are brand new have a light blue. And then if you're relatively new, it's a darker blue. And then it changes to a purple. And then it goes to gold. Then it goes to red. And we are about to see our first users hit the next color tier, which is super exciting. And when people do hit the next tier, we are looking out for that. And we make a big deal about it. We have a whole party inside the world. We record a video, post it to Instagram, and build a whole social presence about this whole leveling up and why it's this kind of really amazing experience. So leveling up, and you see people just very proud of their levels. It's very exciting. Daily reward box. This is another easy one. I think this is much better than the daily streak. I think daily streak is great for the users that it works for, but daily reward box is one that's very tangible. You go in, you collect your reward in the basement, and then you feel that immediate satisfaction of having gotten your daily reward. And so I think this is a lot more tangible, and I just like the way that works. It's very similar to daily streak, but it's actually giving you something. In Murder Manor, where we don't have anything to give users, what we give them is experience, which helps them level up faster, right? So you get an XP bonus every day that you log in. And I think a way that you can make this even better is every day they log in, you increase the amount that's in the box. So for us, we increase it by 10 XP per day that you come back. So if you've been to Murder Manor 10 days, you get a bonus of an extra 100 experience. And it starts at 100. So it's doubled after 10 days of playing. And so for our user at 300 days, they're getting 300 times 10. So 3,000 on top of that. It's pretty insane. Pretty cool. So we talked about the random rolls being a retention tactic. I don't think I need to describe this too much, but what I will share is we have that 1 in 5 chance to be murder, and we have a 1 in N chance to be the sheriff, where if you are just a single player, 1/1, so then you are 100% chance of being the sheriff. You can play Murder Manor solo. You can go collect the keys, unlock the front door, and escape. It is a game that you can play by yourself. I wouldn't say that's the most fun experience. What's nice about that, though, is that people can still join during that window. So if somebody arrives late, they are guaranteed to be the murderer, and suddenly it's sheriff versus murder, and it's a lot of fun. So You might be having an unexpected guest while you're working on finding your keys. And then if you have 2 players, you have a 50% chance of being sheriff. If you've got 3, and so on and so forth. It does mean the sheriff role is a lot harder to get because of this. Like if it's a 16-player world, it's a 1 in 16 chance when you have all 16 people there. And so what we've done, because being the sheriff is so important, and we wanted to make sure that you could be sheriff more than like once per 16, is we've made it so that if you are a skilled player, you can seek out the gun when the sheriff is murdered. So if you have the sheriff pass away, we send out a pop-up notification to all of the innocent players that tells them what floor the gun is placed on. And then they can all go searching out. And that creates its own social engagement where it's like, did you find it? Did you find it? And so like that has a pretty fun effect as well, but it also allows another person to get to be the sheriff. So increasing those odds, which is nice. This next thought is about winning more than 50% of the time. I don't know if we've done this well enough, but like I feel like we're doing pretty good. And so the general rule of thumb is that players want to feel like they're winning more than 50% of the time. Otherwise, they feel like they're losing overall, and that's just not a fun experience. And so I think we see winning a little bit differently here. So you can win by escaping. You can win by just having all the murderers pass away if you're on the innocents, and the reverse is true if you're the murderer. And if you have a large number of murderers, you're more likely to win as a group. And this kind of creates a good like group winning chance. So you can imagine, anyway, so I'm not going to go too crazy in that. But what I think is important here is that there's other ways to feel like you're winning inside this game. So you might feel like you're winning if you get a single kill as a murderer. You might feel like you're winning if you got to be the murderer. You might feel like you're winning if you got a couple keys and put them in the locks, or maybe you were the last person. I feel like there's just a lot of different ways to give them that sense of winning, even if they're not winning. And I feel like that helps. Anyway, I don't know if we're doing it perfectly, but I like how we're doing it. Easy to play. Murder Manor is relatively easy to play. You can come in, you walk in, and if you're an innocent, you're walking around, you find a key, you have to discover where the door is, you put the key in the lock. Pretty straightforward. Same thing if you're a murderer, right? You grab a weapon, you slash somebody. If you're a sheriff, you've got a gun. That's probably the hardest role because you have to click your index trigger. And honestly, there's quite a few people who are still like struggling to figure that out. Especially new VR users. I've definitely, when I take my friends and family in, they can never figure out how to use weapons. They're like, how do I grab stuff? How do I pull index triggers? It just doesn't make sense for newer VR users, but that is that. One thing I want to say now that I'll be talking a little bit more in a minute is about one of the biggest downfalls of Murder Manor that I really want to work out in the next version of it. With like next version being like a complete rewrite. But the idea is that when people join this world, I see a frequent number that come in and they're waiting for the game to end. And the timer's like 1.5 minutes. And like, I don't want to wait 1.5 minutes. And we see people bump out of here. And when we're talking about mobile development, which we'll be talking about very soon, is people need to get into the action within 20 seconds, like 10 seconds ideally. And like, you can't have a game like this for a mobile development. It needs to be like you can continue walking in. And so one of the ways that we're looking at fixing that in Murder Manor is to make it so that the game is continuously open and running. And I don't know exactly if that's going to work or not, but we're going to play around with the idea. But you can imagine like if you walk in, you just get assigned a role, and that the game just kind of keeps rolling. And maybe there's a way to kill everybody. I don't know. But we'll be playing with that idea in the future. But just designing worlds and coming up with ideas that are already having that idea in mind from the beginning will make it a lot easier, right? So like we're kind of trying to fix a world where I'm seeing people leaving actively because of this timer. One other suggestion I've had for some of my students is that we want to have the last 30 seconds be when it closes up. So they only have to wait a maximum of 30 seconds or maybe even 20 seconds. And at that point you say, okay, game's like, we're in the final scene. Anyway, we'll pause there and continue moving on. Growing depth. Okay, so when you start Murder Manor, you don't need to know a lot. It's pretty easy to play without a lot of knowledge, but you get more depth as you play. You learn more about the game. You learn about the key positions, the weapon positions, where are things hidden. You learn about where the reward box is. You learn where the power-up bonus box is. You learn how to become the sheriff. And all of these things make the game more fun the longer you play, and reward people who do play for longer. So I think it's important to have the game very simple and easy to play, any world you're building, but then give something to people who stay for longer and spend time learning the game. So it's not just the same thing. Next up is Power Wash and Pop Pop. These are less violent games. Um, so, um, what are these worlds? Progressive difficulty. Okay, so if you have, like, this is the question that was just asked. What are the worlds? So Power Wash is a game where you show up and you clean gunk off of cars. Pop Pop is a world where you show up and you pop balloons. Relatively simple game mechanics. The thing that makes these similar is the fact that they both have progressive difficulty. The longer you play Pop Pop, the more the balloons get harder and bigger and larger. And Power Wash, the harder the gunk gets and the harder it is to clean off. And you have to like level up. So you have your Power Washer gets leveled up, and Pop Pop you have these like playful guns that get leveled up. And eventually it creates this what I call good insanity, where things are just kind of like crazy. I think one of the things that inspired Pop Pop when I first created it is I was playing a ton of Balloons Tower Defense on my phone, and I really wanted to be able to do that in VR. And if you've ever played Balloons Tower Defense, the balloons that are coming in get insane. It's just, there's so many, it's impossible. We can't recreate that experience in Horizon, at least not that I'm aware of, because there's just too much and there's too many physics objects and it's 3-dimensional, and that's a whole nother talk on its own. But the point is, like, Pop Pop tried to emulate that by getting larger and larger balloons. So you had maximum 20 balloons in the scene at a time. But they got so massive, it was just insane. And Power Wash is very similar, where the cars get harder and harder to clean, and they also reward you with a lot of money the harder they are. So that's pretty fun, good insanity. Satisfying effects. Both of these have very satisfying effects. The dings are literally the same. I'm using the exact same sound effect in both of these for like the popping. It's like ding, ding. It's so satisfying. And so using a very satisfying effect, and then a visual effect, and then haptic feedback as you're using the weapons in each of these. And then user upgrades. They both have user upgrades, so the user has a real impact on the power that they have. And I find that users having control is fun. What I will say is two things. Number one, I feel like both of these are more geared towards an adult audience. I have not seen a staying power in either of these with younger audiences. And I think it's because there's too many variables, and that's hard for the younger audiences to really grasp and work with. And so I love both of these games, but I think they really are more for kind of an adult or an older teen audience. The other thing I will mention for both of these, that they're difficult to balance. These both having progressive difficulty means that you have to balance kind of like the power of the user versus the power of the level. And also when you have a new user arrive, how does that new user play into what's really difficult to play, because it's usually people have been playing for more than 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes it gets to these kind of crazy levels. And then hours later it's even worse. So we did our best in Power Wash to try to balance this out. So we have an easy bay where it takes the lowest level player in the world and uses that to spawn a car for them. And then the hard bay spawns the hard car for the hardest players in the world. And then it's random selection, so the hard bay can still have easy cars on it. And if the low level players are really high, then you can still get hard cars in the easy bay. So there's a little bit of that there. But the balancing act in Power Wash took way longer than I expected. So we had the first game built in like a week, but then it was nearly 3 weeks of just tweaking the numbers to get it to play right, where you didn't get overpowered too quickly. And with Pop Pop, I really think we got lucky. I don't know how, but like I built it in 2 days and the math just worked well. But this one, I spent 3 weeks literally tweaking numbers until it felt like the game was progressing at a decent pace for both users new and old. So I do think the balancing act here is very hard, and I wouldn't recommend anybody try to tackle this unless they're willing to spend a lot of time tweaking numbers. So that is Power Wash and Pop Pop. All right, next up, we're looking at Splash and Horizon Royale. So there is so much I could say about these two worlds alone. It could be a talk on its own, but here are a few key takeaways. Both of these are social hangout spaces. And I know at the very beginning we talked about this, like, oh man, I hope it's not just games. Splash is a very perfect example of not being a game. But Horizon Royale, most of you wouldn't think of it being a social hangout space. But from my experience, that's what it was. It was a social lubricant. The game itself was not important. Sure, there was a lot of depth to the game. You could learn how to use the weapons. There was a lot of special features. And I had so much fun building a game that I thought was like, oh, it's this really cool Royale PvP game. And then at the end of the day, it was really just people talking about life and, having a great time, laughing, making jokes. And the reason people stayed was so that they could hang out and talk. And, the game itself, like I said, it's a social lubricant. It really allowed you to like start talking with people you wouldn't have otherwise talked with. So you can definitely use games to create social experiences. And I've always felt that Horizon is a social space. And so anything that leans into social is going to have more, like staying power in my mind, or it's going to be a lot more fun. I do think Royale was a little too complex for the younger generations, and there's a lot of things we're going to say bad about these two in a second, but for now, we're going to say social was amazing. And Splash had tons of hangout spots. There was lots of places. You have the DJ booth, you've got like all the places. There's a little fire pit in the back, and lots of places you can hang out and just chat with people, and lots of little activities. And each of these activities was really small. They didn't have to be these massive game loops. They could just be, hey, I'm going down the water slide, or I'm going to go do the obstacle course, or I'm going to sit at the fire and smoke a marshmallow. That's not how you say that. Roast a marshmallow, excuse me. And so the point is that those little experiences are also like social lubricant. And there was like things for you to discover. There was a little bit of depth there, right? So if you might have discovered that if you put a floaty on somebody else, you got attached to that person and floated with them. And that became really fun. And people had to share that with each other. And there was just all these little things that you could discover as you played. And there was just lots to discover, lots of little things. So it didn't need a massive game loop. It just had lots of miniature loops. The eventual death of both of these. I mean, Splash and Horizon Royale are still getting visitors to this day. So like saying eventual death, but it feels like it because Royale within the first week or two had 5,000 visitors. It was just an insane number of people, even in today's world, for me at least. I think that's a ton. But it died very quickly after that. And Splash was super successful for the first few months. And we didn't continue updating it, which is part of a big part of the reason. But the point is, I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like what we generated in both of these worlds was something that was really unique and really exciting. And once it became less unique and less exciting, once people started seeing it in other worlds, it was less of a draw. So Royale launched and had it had, I think, one of the first times we saw maps being loaded randomly, right? And I remember, I thought every creator in Horizon had come and stopped by to see this unique thing. And it was still in a gray box state at that time, that first week when it was just blowing up. So there was nothing to look at visually. It was just all gray boxes. But what you got to see was tiles being placed randomly on the grid. And then you could go and play on the grid in this kind of random map generation. And what I love about this is that we inspired loads of creators to go and make map generating worlds where they, you saw Mighty Tiny as probably the most prominent example, but you can load into that with a different map every time you play. And I'm so glad we got to inspire that. If whether or not they actually saw our world, I don't know. But the point is, like, that was what I had hoped to accomplish by making Royale. So it was unique at first, but then immediately after that, it's now just another Super Rumble, another PvP, and there's plenty of those out there. So not unique anymore. It was also flawed in the beginning because there was tons of Horizon bugs. And if I had to make a recommendation to anybody running into a Horizon bug that's preventing the build of their world, we spent 4 months with the Horizon team fixing the bug. I would have either like republished it, might have been an option, because at the time that's how the algorithm worked. Not today, that's not a problem. That's why we see Horizon Royale still getting traffic pretty much every day. But the recommendation would be to just stop developing that mechanic. Like, report it to meta, do your due diligence, but like go find something else to develop, because the asset spawning bug was so broken. If you had multiple players, they saw different things. It was just like really, I'm assuming it's fixed because we spent 4 months fixing it. But like, if you run into a bug like that like game breaking, breaks your mechanic, it's probably best to just like shelf that idea and work on something else. But like, that's just my 2 cents. The next thought there is Splash. We gave out those scripts, and I'm glad we did. And we got to see this start showing up in other worlds. Like Kate Austin's world had a great implementation of the water slide, which I really enjoyed. And but you start seeing like the climbing mechanics and all these things that we had shown off on how to build appearing in other worlds. So it stops being less. But I do think, Waffle literally told me, he's like, you could just like continue updating Splash and it'll stay popular. And I think he's right. And we didn't. Like, we went and worked on other projects and just kind of like did other things. So eventually it's kind of fallen into this place where I still hear people talk about it and they're like, yeah, I wish you'd continue working on Splash. And I'm like, I've got other projects I'm working on now. But anyway, so I think that also alludes to my recommendation for worlds you want to build are worlds that don't require you to continuously update it to be successful. So something like Murder Manor, where I haven't really put an update in 6 months, is nice. It's very nice to be able to work on other projects. That's my brain. My brain likes to do multiple things. I know not everybody's like that. So just kind of work with your brain, right? Player motion is uncomfortable. Both of these worlds had a player motion. That's a bad thing. New users cannot do player motion. I definitely attribute some of the death of these to being the fact that you were being moved. And in Splash, it was a little bit more like you expected it, right? You're stepping on a water slide or whatever it is. In Murder Manor, you're getting blown up, so maybe a little less expected, but yeah, point is try not to use player motion. It can be very uncomfortable. And Royale was overcomplicated. We talked about that. So moving on to the next slide. All right, we're talking about the Horizon algorithm now. And we're going to address mobile game development kind of like in depth a little bit here. Because like this is Meta's priority. We need to recognize that we should be following what Meta is looking for, and they want us to be developing for mobile. This doesn't mean you need to be mobile first. This means you should be thinking, if I'm building a VR world, it should be playable on mobile as well. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be the best mobile game. It can still take a minute to get in, but it should be playable on mobile at the very least. Mobile first, though, means that in less than 20 seconds, you need to be to the fun. And this is because sometimes people coming in on mobile only have 1 minute. Like, that's real. And I will attest that I am one of them. I've literally been waiting outside of a restaurant for my food to come out, and I will be jumping into Horizon, playing Power Wash, and I'll have 1 or maybe 2 minutes to play, and then somebody shows up and I have to like close my phone down. Like, this is real. And one of the things I love about Power Wash is I can literally walk in and play for 20 seconds and then walk out. And it is a game that has that. And what makes that possible in my mind is miniature loops and major loops. So the miniature loop in Power Wash is where you're cleaning the gunk off. And when you clean, that feels super satisfying, and you're getting paid for it in that game. And so you're rewarded in many ways. And then there's major loops, which is when you finish a car and the next car comes in. And there's an even what I call a massive loop that I didn't put into the slide deck, but a massive loop in Power Wash is that because the game is so, there's an end point, but you want people to keep playing, we built a prestige system in. And if you haven't played a lot of mobile games that have prestige, what that means is when you basically reach the end of the game, you can reset back to level 1 and restart, but you get a bonus multiplier. And so in the case of Power Wash, you can prestige and double your money that you're earning from level 1, and you get to start all over again. And for people who want to seek that out, that's a lot of fun. So we have mini, major, and even massive loops if you want to like literally reset the players. And I felt like we kind of had to in there. If you don't have to, don't do it. But you definitely need mini and major loops. Mini loops are the small, fun, moment-to-moment fun, and major loops are the thing that kind of like keeps you excited to keep playing. All right. I wanted to repeat this again because I think it's so important. Under 20 seconds. Like, your target should be 10 seconds to get to fun. People, I think, have felt like they saw the 20-second number and said, oh yeah, I can make it 20 seconds in the beginning before you get to the fun. No. It's like, if you hit 20 seconds, they're leaving your world, or they start leaving your world because it's too long. So you should try 10 seconds as your target. Like, that would be my recommendation. The session length. Whether we're talking about VR or mobile, I think 5 minutes should be like your minimum target session length. So if you're thinking about an experience, when I was developing Power Wash, I thought about how long does it take to clean the first car by yourself? And the time in my mind was 5 minutes. It takes you 5 minutes. It's a long time, but there's miniature loops in there on top of the miniature loops. So you have the mini loop of cleaning each gunk, but then you can also upgrade your Power Washer while you're in that first 5-minute loop. And that's super satisfying because it doubles up your speed. And that doubling up of speed is a hooking algorithm. It's like a hook. When you start it really slow and it takes forever to clean a level 1 car, but then you go and level up your Power Washer by 1 level, and it literally doubles your speed because your damage goes from 1 to 2. And you feel that, and it's so impactful. And then you go and do it a third time, it goes from 2 to 3, which is a much smaller increment. It's not a double now, it's just a 50% increase. That is still, you're trying to get the same hit you got the first time, but you can't. It's engaging, as Waffle put it. I feel like I'm balancing a fine line here. I'm like really nervous, to be honest, as I develop what I consider to be like addicting games. But engaging is definitely a more positive spin on that. But I do find myself actually being almost negatively addicted to these games where I have to play and I can't leave and I have a hard time stopping. So the negative connotation could be there. So I have a moral dilemma there that I'm kind of facing as I develop engaging, quote unquote, games. But yeah, but they're a lot of fun, right? So it's a lot of fun. 5 to 15 minutes. So we start by making a game, and you imagine your first major loop is a 5-minute loop. At least that's what I did. And you can take your own spin on this, however you want to take a spin on it. But then you can imagine, oh, they play 3 of those. That's 15 minutes, right? How do you get them up to like a 15 minutes? If you can get them to a 15-minute average session, sorry, I'm going to cough. And obviously mobile's a little bit shorter session time, but when we're thinking about 15-minute average session length for a VR user, that's a pretty good chunk of their session time. At the MetaConnect Summit, we were told, and they should be putting videos out with this, so you can watch those soon too. But we were told that the average session length is about 45 minutes for VR users. So if you're taking up 15 minutes of their time in VR, you're taking up a good majority of their time. And I know for the games that I play, like Power Wash and Murder Manor, and heck, even Royale back in the day, those games we would spend hours in, and a lot of users would be there for an hour. And so like, it was a prime spot. So we had really a strong audience that really enjoyed that game. And that was pretty awesome. Very, very rewarding as a creator, even just like, yeah, pretty awesome to see that. But like, that's a good target. So like, think about 15 minutes as a good target to get people spending time in there. And then also think about those new users. Really, really think about those new users. You really need to nail their very first experience and make sure that it's amazing so that they actually end up staying for the first 5 minutes, that they end up staying for those next 15 minutes, and that they're coming back the next day to not just spend 15 minutes, but to spend maybe an hour. And so how do you do that is very difficult. It's like, okay, you got to get them to the fun really fast. You've got to build something that rewards them, give them enough information that they've learned enough on how to play the game. If you can socially engage them so that they have some friends there that they want to bring back. I don't know, there's a lot to it, but definitely think about it as you're developing. And one of the ways that I do that personally when I'm developing a world is I always think, what's the very first experience? And I start there. I don't know if this is the right way to do it. Like, you should probably have an idea of what the full idea, like user experience is from the beginning. But I always start at the very beginning and then I tweak it and I keep feeling it out. Like I use a little bit of my own like gut and intuition to be like, okay, what is this like as a brand new user? I load into the world. So, I go into preview mode, I walk in and I try to just imagine being a brand new user. And I do that over and over and over again, every single time. And even in my scripts in TypeScript, I've got a button that I can press that resets me back to being like day 0. So every time I can try testing it as a new user. So building like debugging tools and such like that is really, really useful, but definitely a higher level topic. But point is like really refining that very first experience and reliving it over and over again. But then the other thing that we did with Power Wash that I think worked out pretty well for us is we kept bringing in new testers so that we could see what that first experience was like. So the first time we brought in testers, we had a button that would spawn the car in. And we found that was a bad experience. People couldn't figure out the button. They were confused. It was too much to try and figure out right off the bat, even with like text and pop-ups and all the things that you could possibly do to make that button more visible. So we had to make sure it happened automatically. You walked in and then poof, the thing happened. And we kept bringing in new users to test and like figure out what was the next problem. And we learned, they can't figure out what to do because it wasn't very clear. So we start adding like exclamations above the thing and like make it as clear as we possibly can. So like bringing people in to test is very important, and making sure that that initial user experience is what you expect it to be, because there's often times that when you're playing it, you miss things that are obvious to you or just completely not obvious to new users. Okay. Continuing on the algorithm side of things, things that Horizon's looking for, we know that we have to get users to return within 7 days, or at least I hope you know this. And if you don't, take a note. When a user first visits, right, they need to visit the next day through the next 7 days for that to be considered like a retained user. But then there's this kind of larger algorithm in Horizon that's looking at the monthly version of this. Like, did they return for the next week and the next week and the next week and so on, and for at least 4 weeks. And so when you're really thinking about like, oh, how do I get this to be like something that Meta will pick up and start promoting? This is the numbers they're looking at. They're looking to see, are your users, a good percentage of your users retaining for months, not just days, not just, a week, but actually like monthly. So be thinking about that as you're developing. And one of the biggest downsides to Power Wash is I really believe it's a 2-week game. I do not think it's a 4-week game. And it's one thing that we're trying to figure out, how do we make it so that you can play it for longer? Because right now the game ends after 2 weeks. You've basically done everything you can do. And that kind of stinks. I don't hate it. I still love the game. I put a lot of fun into it, but I might go work on the next project and just kind of leave it where it's at and just be like, that's okay. It doesn't hit that target, but we did our best. Next up, progressive depth. So we talked a lot about depth here and there, but let's like really dive into it. So here's a graph. This is a similar graph to the one we were presented at the summit, and you'll see that in one of those talks like I mentioned. And what you have here on the left is the number of visitors visiting your world, and this is how much knowledge they have. So this means like, if you were the only visitor to your world and you're the creator, you have 100% depth of knowledge. The second you add a second visitor, you can share a lot of knowledge with them, but you can't give them everything. You can do your best, but it's going to be slightly less. And as you grow your users to the point where Meta is pushing out this to the world and everybody's seeing it and everybody's jumping in. I mean, you can advertise your own world yourself too. It doesn't have to be by Meta, but point is like, if your world's getting advertised and tons of new users are showing up, suddenly there's no depth of knowledge. Nobody knows anything about your game. They're showing up with actually no knowledge whatsoever. And they've got to still have a good experience. And so I think a lot of us, and I fully admit to being in this, are down here a little bit, where we've got a lot of users who know our game very well, and people are showing up and they're new users, but they're showing up in an instance with people who do know the game. And those people are really what continues training those new visitors and teaching them how to play. And so that's okay, but it's going to prevent you from getting to here. Like if your game doesn't have the ability to be played, or your world, whether it's a game or not, this doesn't really matter. They need to be able to enjoy the experience the moment they arrive with nobody. Like you need to show up in a world that has 0 people in there who've ever played your world, and they need to be able to have a good time. And then they come back with that same group of people, let's say, the next day, their depth is going to grow. And so I call this like, I don't have a really good name for it, but progressive depth, right? Over time, the longer they play, the more they come back, the larger their depth is going to be. And so the focus in my mind when I think about depth of knowledge is not to like have to require them to have a bunch of knowledge. It's not to limit the amount of depth of knowledge. It's to see them as coming in with nothing. And every day they continue playing, that knowledge grows a little bit more and a little bit more. So that's the idea in my mind. More visitors equals less depth. We mentioned that. Little depth required. We mentioned that. Retain the users and grow their depth. That's really what I think is most important. Retain the users, grow their depth. Don't think about it as like you can't build a fun, engaging, deep game. Build it so that they don't have to be deep, but they can get there the longer they play. And I feel like that really is an amazing thing to provide to users. If you can really give them more to explore and discover the longer. I think a good example of this is actually one of my good friends, Meta Jorgen. He has a world where he put the most complicated mechanic behind the building you spawn in. So you will not discover it until you've been playing for a long time, because nobody looks behind the building you spawn in. And it's such a like hard place to discover, but when you do discover it, it's one of the most incredible mechanics. I forgot the name of the world. It's like Lost in the Wild by Meta Jorgen. It's a exploration world with asset spawning. It's really cool. And it's a crafting table behind the building, just for reference. But yeah, so super cool. Okay, so continuing on in our talk, recommendations. It is highly recommended that you learn and apply the following things. And I want to just like, before we talk about what these things are, explain a little bit of why. What I saw, this is like, I guess, my opinion, at Connect, the last 2 summits, we this year, previous year to that, let's go back to the very beginning, the first summit, they told us very explicitly, TypeScript is the future. Custom model import is the future. And without being like, do this, like without like overly saying, do this, do this, do this, it was pretty clear like we had to do this. And so I had to immediately start transitioning. Like we built Murder Manor originally in code blocks, and I think we are going to just do custom model import, but like, anyway, the point is like, it was our very first world using both TypeScript and custom model import, but it was like, we were told we have to do this. And so I want you to hear the do this for this last year. And what we saw at this summit this year, in my opinion, was mostly people invited who were using TypeScript, who were using custom model import, or who at least dabbled in it. And so this year we were told, we need you to do mobile development. We need you to do in-world purchases. And without saying overly do, we were basically told do these two things. And so if you want to do this for more than just fun, you really need to take these recommendations, I think, from Meta seriously. We got to look at what Meta is targeting, what their kind of direction is. And as much as I love code blocks, because I really do, I love the fact that it makes it easy for everyone to create. I also recognize that like it's not as heavily supported. I hope we can continue pushing on them to keep it supported forever. But it definitely, like, we just saw weeks of it being broken, and like that would never happen in TypeScript. So we need to keep vocalizing that we need them to fix it, absolutely. But we also should be recognizing where their priorities are and potentially shifting, especially if you feel like you want to do it for the long term, for the, let's be honest, the money, and you really want to grow with Meta in that regard. So mobile world development is obviously their priority. And we talked a little bit about being mobile first versus VR first. And I think you can choose either or. I don't really care. But what I really care about is that if you do choose VR first, you think about supporting mobile. I just went to a world a couple days ago, and it was VR only, to the point where you couldn't get in the entrance unless you could open your controllers apart. And so like you couldn't even go into, because I was just going on a mobile to like demonstrate what was in there, but I couldn't do that. And like, just don't put blockers in, like at least let them in. Even if it's like not a great experience on mobile, at least let them in to come and play and hang out. And one of my favorite experiences of this most recently is being in Power Wash developing it. I would go in VR, my headset would die, then I'd pick up my phone and I'd jump back in and be able to continue the conversation. And I feel like that's kind of like the dream universe for this mobile and VR, where you can pick up immediately, like your headset dies, or the opposite. You're on your phone, you get home and you want to like continue picking up in VR, and you can do that. So like imagining a kid in the back seat, right? You're not playing on your phone while you're driving. Maybe you're on a bus. I don't know. There's scenarios there. Point is, like, you want to be seeing your users going from mobile to VR, back to mobile, and vice versa. So mobile first to me means that you're really putting an emphasis on making it an amazing mobile experience. But if you come into VR, it's even better. And if you're VR first, it's like, it's playable on mobile. We didn't like prioritize you, but like at least you can come in and play. So anywho, definitely think about that ability to go back and forth and make sure you're developing for mobile, at least on the minor level. In-world purchases. This is, like I mentioned, very huge. I feel so much better about it than I did a year ago, 2 years ago even. The point is, like, to me, in-world purchases for so long have been kids asking their parents to use their credit card to buy X, Y, or Z, insert your in-world purchase here. And that never felt good to me. But what I can feel good about is the new credit system that Meta's working on, because what we see there is this potential for kids to be given monthly allowances. They can, and I feel like, to me, that's going to be huge, because I don't have to feel bad about saying, hey, here's this thing you can buy for X credits, Meta credits. That therefore removes that sort of like mental blocker for me, and makes it a lot more easy to do. And I have family, some nieces, who already get that. They get $20 a month in Roblox, $20 a month in the Fortnite, and so on. And so I think in a year to 2 years, we're going to see that normalized, where people who are VR regular kid players are going to be asking their parents for Christmas next year, hey, can I get some Meta credits, gift cards? And we'll see the grandparents start doing that in a couple years. I'm like very excited about that, because I think for us, this means we're going to be able to make a ton more money than we've ever been able to make before. And so The two things that we've been told are the most successful in present day horizon are currency and power-ups. So in-world currencies, being able to exchange real-world money for in-world currencies is something that people love doing, and it's very successful. And power-ups would be, think about Matthias's racing game where you can buy a speed boost. And so you can buy a bunch of speed boosts and get going. And so on. So like those are the two things that are currently most successful. I will note that I think the most important thing about in-world purchases is that they're not one-off purchases. They're kind of like, think about how can you make sure that they can keep making that purchase over and over and over again, for better or worse. But if you do one-time purchases, you can't continue doing that, right? So a one-time purchase means that it's already been bought. There's nothing else for them to buy. So if you have users who could spend $100, but you only have one $10 item, you kind of have missed that opportunity. So just think about that as you're developing your in-world purchases. TypeScript is amazingly powerful. Once you get into TypeScript, you can easily develop potentially even faster than you can develop code blocks. It definitely has a steep learning curve, especially if you don't have any coding background. I had a mild coding background. I mostly knew how to like write code that I'd seen other people write, but I was able to pick it up. I mean, I guess I was learning. I followed a Unity tutorial series earlier in the last year about developing for C#, and that was like probably the best kickstart into TypeScript for me. But it is so much different than C#. So definitely if you're going to dive into TypeScript, just dive into TypeScript. But the point is, it is hard. It's not easy. Like I had some coding background, and TypeScript took me 2 months to get a firm grasp of. And then even after that, I've spent this entire year developing that, and there's so much still more to learn, and I'm still just barely what I'd say competent. There's still so much more to grasp at and uncover. So, but that doesn't mean you can't start. So for me, I think learning TypeScript means seeing action happen. So I just recently posted a tutorial. You can check that out in the tutorial section of the Discord. And then last up is custom model import, another really awesome one, but I feel like it's very easy to assume that you have to build all the 3D models yourself. That is not the case. If you are a 3D modeler and that's what you want to do, absolutely, by all means, be a 3D modeler. Do what you enjoy is kind of like my mantra in life. As best as you can, of course, but don't be a murderer. Don't enjoy murder. Okay, just do it in a murder manor, do it in a murder village, or is this the model? Don't do it in real life. This is not legal advice. Consult a lawyer. I don't know. I'm losing my mind right now. Point is, do what you enjoy in life, with some limitations. Ooh. Anywho, custom model import. If you enjoy it, do it. But there's this like separating, like I've focused my entire year on learning coding. I've had to learn a little bit of custom model import, but it's better for me to work with other creators that do custom model import. Like that's their thing. And so it's going to be a good time to start networking, connecting with people and trading services, whether that's, hey, you help me with mine and I'll help you with yours, or however you want to work that out. But definitely, you don't have to do custom model import. You can buy Unity assets. There's whole packages of asset sets. I think the biggest thing that I've heard that I agree with is being careful not to buy two separated themes, right? Like styles. You want your styles to match. If your styles don't match, it's just not going to look very good. So you really want to try to make sure the styling of the assets you're buying matches the overall styling of your world. So think about that. But yeah, if you're a scripter and you don't want to learn 3D modeling, you can do that. There is some solutions there. Next up, we've got takeaways. Remember, so this is just like a quick recap of the whole talk. Effects and action. This is important. Users need to create action in the world. They want to feel effects, visual effects, sound effects, haptic feedback. They want to give them something, make them feel something, right? Some sort of way. When they do something, it causes something to happen. You need mini and major loops. So things that are really small that are satisfying, but major loops that are also satisfying and engaging, so to speak. Social creativity, allow users to define the experience. Don't overly make don't be too strict on what the experience is. I had an example I was going to share, which was if you're building a card game and the card game is, you don't want anyone else to see the cards. So you make it so only the user sitting at that booth can see their cards. But what about the people who want to walk around the table and like engage and like see what everyone's got? Like a real world would be like. Maybe that extra effort to make it so only one user can see it is actually ruining the experience. Sure, you could make it so that only that user and the people not playing could see it. That's an option. But you might be thinking, but what if that person who's looking over the shoulder tells everybody what the cards are? That's a fun social experience. As much as that ruins the experience, it actually creates something unique that you wouldn't have otherwise had, which makes it more fun. Because we can talk bad. We can talk about how that affected the gameplay and how that made the outcomes different. Like social creativity is huge. Don't overly regulate. That's what I would say. So like give them some freedom to be creative. Randomness can turn into retention, guys. We talked a lot about that at the beginning, right? So random rolls, random items, expecting random. I feel like this is a little like loot boxes, so I feel a little nervous building randomness in like this, but it is like a loot box. It's really exciting to see what are you gonna get? What are you gonna get? Whether it's a roll or an item or anything else. Keep it simple. I think one of the biggest things that cannot be overstated is the fact that it's very easy to make things that are overly complicated, but keeping it simple is the most important thing. And find the fun in that simple thing. Like find that fun really early and then focus in on that. Try not to lose it. If you do lose it, go back and see how can we bring it back? How can we like get back to the fun? And keeping it simple can help you do that. And also, like we've only got 1 month for this current competition, which is a great exercise. Whether or not you win or not, it's a great exercise in building simple mechanics that are fun and are retaining. So definitely encourage you to have fun with that. And having a little depth required and gaining that depth over time. So thank you so much for joining this call. I have had an absolute blast. I hope there's been a few nuggets in here for you to take back on your builds.